I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with the one and only Dan Trachtenberg. Dan, Prey has been a huge success commercially and with critics. To me, it sounds like a risky proposition when I'm thinking about how this whole thing came about. So, what was that spark of inspiration years ago that convinced you that this was the film that could be truly great?
Well, I honestly, I think bold decisions are safe bets. I think especially now, the things that audiences want and also what we want to make, there's a lot of crossover. Maybe that wasn't true in years past. But now I think people flock to go see something that is new and unique, or special in some way. So I'm continually trying to figure out, like, what is a thing that does not exist yet? What feels like how can this not exist? An idea, be it science fiction or dramatic or otherwise, and when I was thinking about trying to make a movie that would be a very visceral experience, primarily action driven, but really wanting to be an emotional experience as well, and thought a lot about maybe the secret sauce is taking the engine of a sports film, of an underdog story, and putting that in another genre, sci-fi or survival tale. And in thinking about that, was like, well, what's a protagonist that we rarely see? And unfortunately, Native American and Comanche in particular are so often relegated to playing the sidekick or the villain, never the hero. So I thought, wouldn't that be an incredible experience for us to be rooting for a character and an actor, like we're rooting we're rooting for a character to overcome the odds, but we're also rooting for an actor to finally really, grab a hold of this shot of being the lead of this movie, of this genre. And yeah, so that sort of was the impulse is I think the commercially safest choice is making a bold choice and making a movie that doesn't exist yet,
Yeah, when you put it like that, it sounds like a no-brainer to me. And you're right. Setting it in 1719 with a Comanche woman, it gave it some gravitas that maybe a Predator prequel that someone else would have made maybe would not have had. And I really, really love that. And many of us pop culture geeks have watched you over the years go from like film lover nerd to film student, wannabe filmmaker who yearned to make these films that us fans really want to see. And now you finally followed through with Cloverfield and then this. Do you often hear feedback from, people that have been following your career for years and years and used to listen to your podcast and so forth?
Once in a while, I do hear from someone, or even on a meeting with an executive or producer who said, I used to watch, Totally Rad Show back in the day or whatever, and it's, incredible, overwhelming and incredible. I really attribute my career as much to doing that as doing the short films and commercial work that I was doing. I learned my co-hosts on those shows were actors and presenters and way better at communication, verbal communication than I was. So I really learned, which is a big part of the job of directing, is the way in which, not just having the idea, but the way it's communicated. So I really learned a lot from them. But then also, the first short that I did was based on the video game Portal, and had a lot of visual effects in it. And I could not finish the movie the way I wanted to, from a visual effects standpoint, and took to Twitter, to the people that were following me because of that show, and found VFX artists online, internationally, all over, and was able to finally make that movie. And then that movie is what led to, that short is what led to the career I'm having. So It's all directly linked to the roots, to the upbringing. And Predator, is like a movie that I, loved, like everyone of our ilk, growing up, and really the initial impulse, the seed of this idea started when I wasn't even allowed to watch the movie. And I was on the way to a karate tournament, and all the sixth graders, I was in third grade, I think, and then a bunch of sixth graders were describing the movie to me. And I distinctly remembered one of them saying, there was this character, Billy, who was a Native American tracker, and he stays behind on a bridge over a waterfall to fight the predator. Then when I see the movie, there is no fight, it's just a scream. But that, when they said that to me, what I envisioned was awesome. So this is a little bit of that as well. Prey is that dream that I had in hearing the movie when I wasn't allowed to see it coming to fruition.
You're just bringing me back to my childhood as well, because I remember sitting down to watch Prey way back when it first came out, and with my wife, who wasn't really familiar with that whole franchise, and I'm like, okay, so Predator, this is what happened, and I was like probably 10, and then and it's so important to me. It's so important to us ridiculous film geeks, and I'm hoping one day we get to see Alex, Jeff, and Dan together on a Prey reunion on TRS. But that's a whole other chat. So let's keep going. So what I loved most about the first half of Prey is that this Predator, he continues to level up in this game of bloodlust until he can find who he perceives to be, or he or she, or what it perceives to be, the top of the food chain. And that's a Comanche woman who is herself wanting to be a warrior and a hunter, and is still learning. She's a fledgling. Like, that's really interesting to me, and the odds are stacked against her. And then you keep upping the ante until they finally have to face off. What are your thoughts on the profound contrast then between these two ultimate fighters? And why did you want to do it that way? So, because obviously the odds are so stacked against her, and yet she is so fierce that she's able to overcome him.
I mean, that's the kind of story that I love. I mean, Rudy is one of my favorite movies of all time. Karate Kid's one of my favorite movies of all time. I have always had a little bit of an issue with finding myself in the Luke Skywalker tale, or the Harry Potter, where the chosen one, someone who's born with a gift, and then has to learn how to use it. And certainly there's something about that is saying, like, oh, all of us have gifts and we have to figure out how to use it. But I've so much more fall in love with characters that don't seem ready for what's ahead, and are trying to prove to themselves and to those around them, and like, that I can show up, I can make it, and step by step witnessing them, thus invigorating me as an audience member, like, you can do it, like, choice by choice, you can make it happen. So frankly, that was me as a filmmaker. Like, that I was not, when I first started, I did the New York Film Academy, and they do a leveling up of, like, film. You do something without sound, then something with sound, whatever. And all I did week by week was a new thing you did. And I was the worst student, not in terms of student, but I was the worst filmmaker in the class. I really was not good. But finally, the final film I did was decent, was halfway good. And it's like, oh, if I just try, if I just work, I can do this. I'm not Steven Spielberg. I'm not a prodigy at this. That is not my story, but my story can be, if I work hard, I will get there. So I personally relate to a protagonist like Naru, and I suspect most of us relate to a protagonist like Naru way more than we do to Arnold in the original, or some of the other protagonists in the franchise, or other genre movies, certainly from the 80s, Mm-hmm. So I really wanted to make a story about that kind of character, and it being a predator, it being inside this IP, where the threat, where the big bad, this canonical creature that we know, is searching for who is alpha, who is best, and deciding early on in the movie it's not her. like it just enhances her story. Like it being a Predator movie makes the dramatic storytelling far better than it would be if it was not a Predator film.
Yeah.
So that's something that I really loved when this idea came together. I wanted to make sure we fully embraced.
Yeah, that actually, Dan, it didn't really occur to me until you started explaining it, that you're so right. So many of us sometimes don't feel like we fit in, or we're working really hard and striving, we're trying to achieve something, and we're not necessarily brilliant at it like that person over there, and yet we're able to achieve some really awesome things. And that's really at the core of this film. It's so true. Amber Midthunder is a revelation in this. Like she absolutely killed it, pun intended. And so I know that it took a while to kind of land on her as the lead, but what was it about her? Was there a moment where you said, yeah, look, this has to be Naru because she's perfect?
I mean, frankly, in the first Skype, this movie was happening pre-pandemic when Skype was the thing that we all used all the time. When we first Skyped, I kind of knew it was her. That was her first audition, was over Skype. But then we did some chemistry tests, some screen tests, and she did a scene 3 ways. She did it once in English, once in Comanche, and once non-verbally. And the non-verbal performance of a scene with dialogue was incredible, truly stirring. And then there was a physicality portion of the screen test, and she never, in doing that portion, she never was just like, I'm jumping and sliding and running. It was like she was still finding the narrative beats to portray while she was doing the action. And so all that stuff really just kind of swirled together and made it obvious, like, she is this character. Yeah.
She's really good. You know, Prey boasts a 93% of Rotten Tomatoes, consensus being that it's that rare action thriller that spikes adrenaline without skimping on character. And typically for your work, from what we've seen, from what you've done in the past, you're very good at that thoughtfulness and intimacy and compelling eye for character and detail, which a lot of us really appreciate, Dan. And so I'm just then wondering, given all the plaudits and all the, the hosannas for not skimping on character, was there much noise maybe from the studio or during pre-production and production to focus more on the action because that's what the audience want to see? Or were you able to really stamp your foot down and say, no, we really do need to focus on character?
No, that wasn't my experience. In fact, the opposite was true. I think everyone, rightfully or wrongfully, assumed I would have a knack for the action stuff and like let that, oh yeah, that's gonna happen, that'll be cool. And then, but we were all cracking down on how to make the story more emotional, more insightful, as much as we possibly could, from the studio all the way through all the producers and myself. So, and it's ironically, one of the producers of the movie always remarks, it's Ben Rosenblatt, he always remarks, like his favorite part is watching the fur trapper when the predator goes ham on all the fur trappers, because he barely paid attention to it while we were making the movie, because it just, everything else is what we were really trying hard to get as right as possible. And then the action, I was trying very hard with a lot of crew, but no one else was as focused on it on the producer level. So but yeah, that's my favorite thing. I when the movie was coming out, I was thinking about how excited I was to show my mom the movie, which is weird because it's filled with like beheadings and awful violence. But I remembered as a kid this sensation of dying to show her T2 after I saw it. I was not dying to show her Terminator after I saw it, or even Predator after I saw it. But T2, which is about parenthood, about motherhood and humanity, and also filled with thrills, that's a beautiful movie. Jaws has great drama, great comedy, terrifying horror, and high adventure. I'm always looking forward to combining, not only combining genre, but combining emotion, like trying to get to have our cake and eat it too. So
wow, there's so many, by the way, amazing action sequences and set pieces in the film. So that's, I'm not giving them short shrift. Like when Tarbin dies, the aftermath, that chase through the woods and the tall grass, Naru sinking in the mud, like unreal. So I mean, you're just able to mix both so perfectly, which is really great. And then you have the audacity in the closing credits to give us that little kernel that after what they just went through, but wait, target shoppers, there might be more. And that just makes us all so excited for what might come. I know that there's probably nothing happening yet, but could a prequel sequel be in the on the cards at some point soon?
I mean, throughout the whole process of making this, we kept on talking about, oh, wouldn't it be cool if another kind of movie was this? So that has never stopped happening, the discussion about, I can say that, in thinking about other things to do, we are all excited about making something as bold as this movie, as opposed to sometimes there's a really radical sequel in a franchise, be it the second one or the fifth, whatever. And then the things that follow are then the sequels to that thing that was bold, as opposed to yet another bold idea, yet another as doing what that thing did. And so we've thought a lot about how can we still do something just awesome. So yeah.
Well, I really can't wait to see what you're going to do next. But before we go, as a guy who knows so much about pop culture, and you revere filmmakers like I do and many other people watching this do, you scored a DGA nomination for your featured directorial debut, 10 Cloverfield Lane, about 6 years ago now. Just talk me through that. That's a huge achievement. And then to add on to that, for given your background, what were you thinking that night when you were in that room?
I thank you for asking about that. That is, I often forget about it. And then I remember, like, wait, that happened. That's so crazy. It was. I'll tell you honestly, what crept up for me was this realization of how strange the competition process is, because I really was relaxed, and I remember not thinking that I would win that, or where there's other really great films that would win the thing. But the competition, like a normal, like the Super Bowl or whatever, like you're competing that night to win the thing. Like everyone in that room we're in competition with each other. I didn't want to be in competition with you. And also we already did the thing. Like it already happened. Like I can't do anything tonight to help win the thing, like, or whatever. And other people were sad and my table were like sad when we didn't, and then suddenly I felt guilty for, like, all of it was very uncomfortable is the point. But I was also like, and I remember Kelly Freeman Craig was nominated that year. We've stayed in touch. I loved her movie. And so it brought about that kinship, which was great. And I've been going to the DGA for years. Because I when I first moved to LA, I started directing commercials. So was in the DGA quite quickly and would go to screenings all the time. And every time I go to the DGA screenings, I was terrified. I'm not joking. This is that they would say my card was declined. Like, oh, I haven't worked enough to have the membership for. Like really, I would probably still feel that way. Like, because it's so baked into the neurosis of showing up to that building. And so being there nominated for thing was definitely a big hunk of validation for sure. It helps with the imposter syndrome, but doesn't cure it, but it helps.
It's slightly refreshing to hear you talk about imposter syndrome. We all have it. And I just remember back when you got that nomination, given Gold Derby, this is what we do. We were jumping for joy because that I just can only imagine the validation and pride that you would have felt that day, hearing that your peers in the industry thought that you did a really good job. And on that note, Dan, we all really love Prey. Congratulations on some beautiful work, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much.